Thunder rolled across the Amalfi cliffs like the growl of an unseen beast. The De Luca mansion stood at the edge of the world that night. Black marble floors, silent corridors, and a storm raging against its glass walls. Lorenzo De Luca had never feared the dark, but that evening, something about the silence beneath it unsettled him. He poured himself a glass of whiskey, the amber liquid trembling in his hand as lightning split the sky. Below the floorboards, the old wine cellar door had creaked open on its own. The sound was faint, like a whisper in a cathedral. But in a house built on secrets, every whisper meant something. He placed the glass down, listened. Another sound, a soft, rhythmic tap. Not footsteps, not dripping water, something lighter, wooden, uneven. Lorenzo took the old brass key from the wall and descended the spiral staircase. The air grew colder with each step, thick with the scent of damp earth and aged oak. His breath came in shallow clouds. The lights flickered as he reached the basement floor. And there, in the corner where the shadows swallowed the stone, stood a crib. Wooden, unfamiliar. For a moment, he thought his mind was playing tricks on him. But then the next flash of lightning proved it real. Tiny carvings of stars and moons along its rim, a blanket folded neatly inside. It shouldn't have been there. No one should have been able to bring it in without him knowing. He took a slow step closer. Something glimmered under the blanket, a small envelope, sealed with wax. His name written in trembling cursive, Lorenzo. The handwriting struck him like a memory. He hadn't seen it in 3 years. Elena. He froze. The air leaving his lungs as though the room itself had stolen it. Before we begin this story, tell us. Where in the world are you listening from, and what time is it there? Now let's begin. Lorenzo De Luca, the man who ruled half the southern coast with silence and fear, felt the kind of tremor he hadn't known in years. He tore open the envelope. Inside was a single piece of paper, folded once. The ink had blood in some places, as if tears had touched it. She said you'd never believe her. That was all. No signature, no explanation. He ran a hand over his face. Who? He whispered into the emptiness. But the cellar only answered with the groan of thunder. His heart pounded, unsteady and raw. The words haunted him, not because of their mystery, but because of their echo. She said, Elena. The woman who had once played piano in his club. Whose music softened even the cruelest nights of his world. The woman who had vanished 3 years ago without a trace, leaving behind nothing but silence and a memory of rain. He remembered that night too clearly, her trembling hands as she said, "There are things you don't understand." His cold response, "Then make me understand." Her eyes, filled with tears, before she whispered, "You won't believe me." And she'd been right. He hadn't. Lorenzo sat beside the crib, his hand resting on its wooden edge. It was small, barely large enough for an infant. The blanket inside was pale blue, embroidered with silver thread. Something inside him, something buried and long ignored, began to stir. He lifted the blanket gently. Beneath it lay a tiny stuffed bear, worn and soft, one button missing from its eye. A faint scent clung to it, lavender and rain. Elena's scent. He stared at it for a long time, then his hand clenched. Someone had brought this here. Recently. Someone who wanted him to find it. He stood, scanning the basement for signs, footprints, disturbed dust, a draft from an open vent. His instincts sharpened, the predator in him returning. But beneath the steel of his expression was confusion. The kind that made even a man like him feel small. At the far end of the cellar, the security camera blinked faintly. Red light, still recording. He'd installed it years ago for smuggling operations that never came to pass. Maybe it had seen something. He turned and left the basement, the note still clutched in his hand. The mansion above was silent except for the rain. Portraits of the De Luca lineage stared down at him as he walked the corridor. Men with power, women with secrets. He wondered what they would think of this, the great Lorenzo De Luca haunted by a crib. He reached his office, the smell of cigar smoke lingering in the air. "Antonio," he called. His lieutenant appeared at once, tall, square, shouldered, always half a shadow behind him. "Boss. Check the cameras, all of them. Especially the basement feed." Antonio frowned. "What happened?" "Just do it." He waited as the man pulled up the footage. The timestamp flickered 20:37 a.m. The cellar, empty at first. Then a figure appeared. A woman, her face obscured by the hood of her coat, carrying something wrapped in white. She walked slowly, carefully, as if afraid of waking ghosts. Lorenzo leaned closer to the screen, his breath caught. Even through grainy footage, he recognized the way she moved. The gentleness of her hands, the way she brushed hair from her face, even when none was there. Elena, he whispered. Antonio glanced at him. You know her. Lorenzo didn't answer. He couldn't. The footage cut off just as she reached the far corner, where the crib now stood. The camera had been disabled the next second. He dismissed Antonio with a silent gesture and sank into his chair. The note lay before him. Those 6 words felt heavier than all the ledgers and contracts of his empire. She said you'd never believe her. He pressed his fingers against his temple. The rain outside grew heavier, pelting the glass like scattered memories. He thought of the nights Elena played piano for him, her back straight, eyes closed, the melody trembling through candlelight. He thought of her laughter, quiet and soft, and the last thing she ever said before she left. If something happens, promise me you'll look beneath what you see. He hadn't understood then. But tonight, standing between a crib and a note, he realized she had meant it literally. Downstairs again, he crouched by the crib once more. He checked beneath it, floorboards uneven. His fingers brushed something cold. He pried the boards up. Beneath them, hidden in a hollow compartment, lay a small silver locket. Inside, 2 things. A photograph of Elena, smiling faintly, and beside her a child, no more than a few months old. His breath caught. The child's eyes, dark, piercing, were his own. The thunder outside roared again, but this time, it sounded like a confession. Lorenzo sat there for a long time, the locket pressed to his palm. Somewhere above, the mansion groaned under the weight of the storm, but he didn't move. The world he thought he knew had shifted. And for the first time in years, the untouchable Mafia boss whispered a single word. Half prayer, half curse. Elena. The rain hadn't stopped. It drummed against the mansion's windows through the entire night. An unrelenting rhythm that matched the pounding of Lorenzo's heart. He hadn't slept. He hadn't moved from his office chair since he found the locket. The silver piece still rested in his palm, the photo burning through his skin like truth long buried. Elena Moretti. The name he'd forbidden anyone to speak after she vanished. The name that had once softened his voice in a world that knew only commands and blood. Before we begin this part of the story, tell us, where in the world are you listening from, and what time is it there? Now, let's continue. Elena had been light in a place made of shadows. He first met her in his private club, La Notte Bianca, 3 years ago. A place that smelled of bourbon, tobacco, and old promises. She was sitting at the grand piano on the stage, her fingers trembling over ivory keys, as though she wasn't sure she deserved the music she carried. The night had been loud, filled with laughter and deceit, until her first note cut through it like glass through silk. Everyone turned. Lorenzo remembered how he'd stopped mid-conversation, his cigarette burning down unnoticed between his fingers. Her music wasn't perfect. It was fragile, emotional, almost shy, but every chord told a story that words could never reach. When she finished, no one applauded. They were too entranced to remember how he had approached her afterward, his voice low. You play as if the world's ending. She'd smiled faintly. Maybe it already has. Back then, he didn't know her secrets. He only knew the way she avoided mirrors, the way she flinched at sudden noise. He'd seen bruises once, fading purple beneath the sleeve of her dress. When he asked, she said quietly, "It's nothing that concerns you." But it had. Lorenzo De Luca wasn't known for gentleness. Yet with her, it came naturally. He started walking her home after performances, a few steps behind, as if pretending he wasn't protecting her. She never said thank you. But once, she looked back and whispered, "You don't have to be who they say you are." No one had ever said that to him. Now, 3 years later, her ghost sat across from him in every empty room. The locket, the crib, the note, and that child's face, the eyes that mirrored his own. Antonio knocked on the door, snapping him from his thoughts. "Boss," he said cautiously. "We traced the car seen near the property last night. No plates, but we found tracks leading toward the old road by the cliffs." Lorenzo's voice was quiet, too quiet. "Anyone see who was driving?" Antonio hesitated. "No. But there was something else, a music sheet caught on a branch." He handed it over. Rain-stained, torn. But the notes were still visible. The song was one he knew too well. Elena's favorite lullaby. The same melody the music box had played in her old room. Lorenzo's jaw tightened. "She's alive." Antonio frowned. "You're sure?" After all this time, he didn't answer. He didn't need to. By noon, he was standing in Elena's old apartment above the club. Dust hung in the air, disturbed by the first footsteps the place had felt in years. The piano was still there, untouched, though a few keys had yellowed with time. A single photograph sat on top of it, the sea at sunset. She had loved the sea, said it was the only place she could breathe. He opened the drawers, searching for anything she might have left behind. Letters, clues, proof that he hadn't imagined it all. In the bottom drawer, beneath stacks of old sheet music, he found a folded envelope. It was addressed not to him, but to herself. If I forget who I am, may this remind me. Inside, a small piece of paper, worn and creased. A child's drawing. Crude but clear. A little boy holding the hand of a woman with long hair. Above them, written in uneven letters, Mama and me. His throat tightened. She'd known. Even then, that night, he stood in the empty club, watching the stage bathed in blue light. He could almost see her there. Back straight, eyes lowered, the soft shimmer of candlelight on her skin. He closed his eyes, and for a moment, he could hear her again. Promise me something. She'd said the night she disappeared. What? That if I ever vanish. You won't look for revenge. You'll look for the truth. He had broken that promise long ago. Back in the present, the storm outside grew stronger, the kind that drowned even thoughts. Lorenzo stood by the window, the reflection of lightning flashing across his face. He whispered to no one. Why did you hide from me, Elena? But the night gave no answer, only the soft creak of the wind and the memory of a lullaby echoing through the walls. Later that evening, Lucia, the old housekeeper who had served his family for decades, appeared in the doorway, wringing her hands. Signor, she said softly, may I speak? He turned, his expression unreadable. You knew something. She hesitated. I saw her. The night she left. The glass in his hand cracked. What did you just say? Lucia swallowed. She came back to the mansion in the rain. She was crying. Said it wasn't safe anymore. She asked for the key to the basement. I didn't understand. But she begged me not to tell you. His pulse throbbed. Why? She said you wouldn't believe her, that she had to protect something, someone. Lorenzo stepped closer, his voice barely a whisper. Lucia, was she alone? The old woman shook her head slowly. She was carrying a bundle. Like she was holding a baby. The world seemed to tilt beneath him. He grabbed the back of the chair to steady himself, breath shallow. A child, his child. The pieces were falling into place, but the picture they formed was unbearable. If Elena had hidden his son in his own house, what had she been running from? Not from him. From his world. He stared out the rain-streaked window. Below, the sea raged, as though mourning with him. By midnight, the house had gone still again. Lorenzo sat alone, the photograph of Elena and the drawing of the boy before him. The storm had softened, turning into a drizzle that whispered against the glass. He lifted the locket once more, opened it, and studied their faces. Hers, gentle, luminous, the child's, unknown yet familiar, and his reflection, haunted, older, cold. He closed the locket and whispered into the quiet. I'm going to find you, Elena, both of you. Outside, the last thunder rolled over the sea, a sound like destiny turning a page. Morning arrived quietly, as if the storm had exhausted even the sky. The world outside the De Luca mansion glimmered with the silver light that comes only after rain. Puddles shimmered like glass, and somewhere beyond the garden, the sea whispered secrets against the cliffs. Lorenzo hadn't slept. He hadn't even tried. The hours between night and dawn were spent tracing the edges of the locket, replaying Lucia's words over and over. She came back to the mansion in the rain. She was carrying a bundle. A baby, his son. The idea both shattered and steadied him. Somewhere out there, a child with his eyes and Elena's smile existed. Born in fear, hidden in silence. And she had trusted him enough to leave the truth in his home, but not enough to stay. He stared out at the pale horizon. For the first time in years, power and money meant nothing. All he wanted was the sound of her voice again. Before we begin this part of the story, tell us, where in the world are you listening from, and what time is it there? Now, let's continue. Lorenzo walked down the long corridor to the east wing. To the room that had belonged to her. He hadn't opened that door in 3 years. The brass handle felt cold beneath his hand. When it turned, a faint creak echoed through the hallway, and dust motes danced in the pale morning light. Everything was just as she'd left it. The ivory curtains, the faint scent of lavender, the piano by the window. A few music sheets were still scattered on the bench, yellowed at the edges. He stepped closer, his shadow falling across the keys. The air felt heavy here, charged with the weight of memory. He reached out and pressed one key, softly, a single note, then another, and another. The sound filled the room, hesitant, fragile, yet achingly familiar. It was her melody. The same one she played every night when the club emptied, when it was just the two of them left in the quiet glow of candlelight. A melody that once ended with her whisper, "You hear that? It's not music. It's forgiveness pretending to be sound." Something clicked beneath the piano as the last note faded. A soft, metallic noise, mechanical. Lorenzo knelt, pushing aside the stool. Underneath the piano's wooden frame, a small compartment was carved into the underside of the board. Subtle, nearly invisible. Inside it, a small music box lay waiting, coated with dust. Its silver surface was engraved with vines and stars. The kind of delicate design only Alina would choose. He turned the tiny key on its side. The melody began to play, the same lullaby from the crib. But inside the box, hidden beneath the gears, was a tiny flash drive. He took it upstairs to his office, connecting it to his laptop. The screen flickered, then filled with the grainy static of an old security feed. Time-stamped 3 years ago, the footage was from one of his basement cameras. Lightning flashed through the frame, and then, she appeared. Elena. She was drenched, her hair clinging to her face, her hands trembling as she carried something wrapped in a white blanket. She looked around. Terrified, desperate. Before kneeling beside the wine racks, Lorenzo leaned forward, every muscle locked. She placed the bundle down, kissed it, and whispered something the microphone couldn't catch. Then she slid something, maybe the locket, beneath the floorboards and looked straight toward the camera. Her eyes glistened. And then, just before the video cut out, she mouthed 2 words. "Forgive me." The screen went black. Lorenzo stared at the reflection in the dark monitor, his own face pale, his jaw tight, his eyes raw. He whispered, "You should have stayed." But deep down, he knew, she hadn't been running from him. She'd been running for him. Later that afternoon, he drove down to the club in the heart of Amalfi. The streets were slick with rain, the air heavy with the scent of salt and espresso. Inside, La Notte Bianca was empty. Closed for renovations, abandoned like a memory he couldn't let die. The stage lights still hung crooked above the piano, and the dust shimmered like falling ash in the sunlight. He walked to the bar counter, where she used to sit during breaks, sipping warm tea while he stood silently in the corner, pretending not to watch her. He opened the drawers, rifling through old papers and forgotten ledgers. But in the back, tucked behind a false panel, he found another envelope, this one sealed with wax shaped like a tiny star. Inside a single piece of sheet music and a note. "If you ever find this, it means I was right. They're watching you. Don't trust anyone who says they're loyal. The truth is buried where the tide never reaches." Lorenzo frowned. Her words weren't poetic this time. They were a warning. He turned the music sheet over. On the back, faint pencil lines formed what looked like coordinates. A location. He traced them with his thumb. It pointed to a small coastal town just north of Amalfi, Maiori. That night, he stood on his balcony as the sea winds lashed against the cliffs. The note lay on the table beside him, next to the locket and the drawing of the child. Lucia entered quietly, setting down a tray of coffee. "Signor," she said softly, "you haven't eaten all day." He shook his head. "I can't." She hesitated, then added, "I used to hear her play, you know. Late at night. She'd hum while she worked in the garden. Once, she told me that she was afraid of silence. Because in silence, the truth is too loud." Lorenzo looked out at the horizon, where the last sliver of sunlight bled into the sea. She was right. When the house grew quiet again, he sat at the piano one last time. His fingers hovered above the keys, remembering the weight of her touch. Slowly, he began to play her song, imperfectly, brokenly, but with the same ache she once carried in her eyes. As the melody filled the air, something shifted inside him, not peace, but purpose. He would follow her trail, no matter where it led. And if the truth was buried, where the tide never reaches, then he'd dig until the sea ran dry. Outside, the moon rose over the water, pale and distant. The waves below crashed softly against the cliffs, like applause from ghosts. Lorenzo stopped playing, his voice barely a whisper. "Wet for me, Elena." The music box on the desk began to play again on its own, slow, haunting, beautiful. And beneath its fragile tune, the wind carried a whisper through the open balcony door. So faint, he might have imagined it. "I never stopped." The following morning dawned gray, the kind of light that never fully woke. The De Luca estate stood beneath low clouds, veiled in mist and memory. Lorenzo sat at the long oak dining table, untouched breakfast cooling before him. The world outside his windows moved as always. Guards changing shifts, engines humming in the courtyard, The rhythm of a life built on control. Yet inside he was unmoored. For the first time in years, he didn't know what move to make next. The coordinates from Elena's note burned in his mind, leading him toward Mayuri. But instinct told him to understand what she'd feared before he followed. Someone had betrayed her trust, someone close. And if she had truly been watched, then even his walls weren't safe. Before we begin this part of the story, tell us, where in the world are you listening from, and what time is it there? Now, let's continue. Lucia entered quietly, her hands clasped in front of her apron. She had served the De Luca family since Lorenzo's childhood, loyal, soft-spoken, the kind of presence that made a house feel alive. But today, her eyes wouldn't meet his. Lucia, he said softly. Set. She hesitated. Signor, set. She obeyed, folding her trembling hands in her lap. He pushed the music box across the table toward her. You remember this? Her eyes widened. Madonna, yes. That belonged to the pianist, to Signorina Elena. He leaned forward, voice low. You said you saw her the night she left. Tell me everything. No hesitation, no fear. Lucia took a deep breath, her voice wavering. It was late. Past midnight. I was closing the kitchen when she came in, soaked from the rain, pale as death. She begged me not to make a sound. Lorenzo's chest tightened. Was she hurt? She looked frightened. But not for herself. She carried something, wrapped in a white blanket. She held it close, like a mother holds her child. The words hung in the air like ghosts. Lucia went on, voice shaking. She asked for the key to the basement. Said she had to hide something before it was too late. I didn't understand. But she said if you found it, you'd know what it meant. Lorenzo clenched his jaw. And then, she told me not to tell anyone she'd been there. Not even you. I asked her why. She said there were eyes in this house that didn't belong to you. He frowned. Eyes. Lucia nodded. She said someone among your men was paid to watch her, and report back to your rivals. The silence that followed was suffocating. Lorenzo's mind raced. Faces, names, loyalty, betrayal. Then Lucia added quietly, before she went down to the basement, she stopped by the piano room. She played something, just for a moment. It was the same lullaby she always hummed. Afterward, she cried. Lorenzo's throat ached. And you never saw her again? Lucia shook her head, tears glistening. When I went down later, she was gone, only rainwater on the floor. And her scent, lavender and salt. He rose from his chair, pacing to the window. The sea beyond the cliffs was restless, waves slamming against the rocks like an unanswered question. Lucia, he said quietly, you've been with my family since I was a boy. Tell me honestly, do you believe she left because of me? Lucia hesitated. I think she left because she loved you too much. He turned, eyes narrowing. Explain. She knew what this world does to love. She thought leaving was the only way to save what little of it she had left. But she never stopped caring. I saw it in her eyes that night. Her words dug deep, pulling at wounds he'd buried. He remembered the last fight they'd had. Her voice trembling, his raised in anger. You don't understand what you're walking into, she had said. Then make me understand. He'd snapped. You wouldn't believe me even if I did. He'd walked away first. And when he turned back, she was gone. Lucia broke the silence. There's something else, I never told anyone. But the night before she vanished, I found a letter under your study door. He turned sharply. What letter? I burned it, she whispered. I was afraid it would bring trouble, but I remember the first line. Her voice trembled as she recited, If you love me, don't look for me until the music stops playing. Lorenzo's breath caught. He understood now. The lullaby, her melody, had been her message. Every note she left behind was a trail of truth disguised as music. Lucia, he said softly, you've done enough. Go rest. But as she rose, she hesitated again. Signor, if you find her, promise me you won't return the man you were. He didn't answer. He simply turned back to the rain and said, that man died 3 years ago. That afternoon, Lorenzo called Antonio into his office. I need to know who had access to this house the week Elena disappeared, he said. Guards, staff, delivery, everyone. Antonio raised a brow. You think someone inside betrayed you? Lorenzo's voice was calm but cold. I don't think, I know. Antonio hesitated. And if I find them? Bring them to me. He turned away, staring again at the music box, its soft lullaby echoing faintly in the background. No one touches what was hers. Not anymore. That night, Lorenzo returned once more to the piano room. The moonlight filtered through the sheer curtains, washing the walls in silver. He sat before the piano, tracing his fingers over the keys. For the first time, he noticed faint scratches etched into the wood just below the lid. 4 small words, carved by hand. "Forgive me for hiding." His breath caught. He pressed the same sequence of keys as before. The lullaby, slow and trembling. And then, beneath the piano, he heard it again, a soft click. Another hidden compartment. Inside it, a folded piece of paper, and a small charm shaped like a star. He opened the note. "If you find this, it means they found me first. Trust no one except the sound of my song. It will lead you home." His hands shook slightly as he read it again. They found me first. Who were they? His mind flashed through the past. Rivals who wanted him dead. Allies who smiled too easily. It could be anyone. But one thing was certain now. Elena hadn't abandoned him. She had been hunted. And she had hidden the truth in the only language they once shared, music. The piano's final note lingered in the air as the night deepened. Lorenzo sat in silence, the star charm turning slowly between his fingers. Outside, lightning flashed once more over the dark sea, illuminating the cliffs of Maori in the far distance. The place she had marked in her note. He whispered to the empty room, "Your song isn't over, Elena. I'm coming to find its ending." Rain had always been a companion to his silence. It fell hard against the windshield as Lorenzo's black Maserati curved along the cliff roads toward Maori. The coastal town Elena had written in her trembling script. The headlights cut through the storm like blades, reflecting on the wet asphalt. Antonio drove, glancing at him now and then, as if afraid to ask the questions hanging in the air. "You're sure about this?" he finally said. "If she's alive, she's been hiding for a reason. Maybe you shouldn't drag her back into your world." Lorenzo didn't look away from the window. "She didn't disappear to escape me. She was running from something I never saw." Antonio said nothing more. He knew better than to challenge that tone, the one that came from both guilt and longing. "Before we continue this chapter, tell us, where in the world are you listening from, and what time is it there?" "Now, let's begin." By the time they reached the outskirts of Maori, the storm had softened into drizzle. The town looked half asleep, cobblestones slick with rain, sea air heavy with the scent of salt and rosemary. Lorenzo had changed. Gone was the tailored suit and the gold watch that once symbolized power. In their place, a dark coat, gloves, and silence. He wasn't the Mafia boss tonight. He was just a man chasing a memory. They stopped before an old house at the edge of town. Paint peeling, shutters broken. A small garden of overgrown wildflowers. Yet somehow, it felt familiar. He recognized the ivy climbing the wall. He remembered planting it with Elena one spring morning. Her laughter caught in the wind. The coordinates had led here. Lorenzo stepped inside the gate, his boots sinking into the wet earth. The sound of the sea roared faintly behind him. Then, he heard it. A child's laugh, soft, distant. From inside, he froze. Antonio's hand went instinctively to his holster, but Lorenzo raised a hand. No guns. He pushed open the door slowly. It creaked, and there, in the dim light of a flickering candle, stood a little boy no older than 3, dark curls, wide gray-blue eyes. Eyes that mirrored his own. For a moment the world stopped. The rain, the thunder, the ache, all silenced by the sound of the child's small voice. "Who are you?" the boy asked. Lorenzo's throat tightened. He crouched down slowly. I'm a friend of your mother's." The boy tilted his head. "Mama's sleeping. You shouldn't wake her." Antonio's face paled. "Lorenzo," he whispered. But Lorenzo's body moved on its own. Toward the narrow hallway, past the child, toward the faint light spilling from a half-open door. He stepped inside. On the bed lay a woman. Thin, pale, her dark hair spread like ink against the pillow. Her hand rested on a folded blanket. For one heart-stopping second, he thought she was gone. But then, her fingers twitched. Elena, her eyes fluttered open. Disoriented, weak, but unmistakably alive. "Lorenzo." Her voice was a whisper of disbelief. He took a step forward. "You're real." A tear slid from her eye. "You weren't supposed to find me." He knelt beside her bed, his hands trembling as he brushed a strand of hair from her face. "You left me with nothing but a song, a crib, and a note I couldn't understand. I had to," she whispered. "If they knew about him, they would have killed us both." He turned to look toward the doorway, where the boy stood clutching a small stuffed wolf. The resemblance was undeniable. His eyes, his jawline. "Elena," his voice broke. "He's mine, isn't he?" Her silence was answer enough. For a moment, he couldn't breathe. 3 years, All that time believing she'd abandoned him, when in truth, she'd been protecting something far greater than herself. Elena, he whispered, why didn't you tell me? She smiled weakly. Because you were the storm, Lorenzo, and I had to save what the storm would destroy. He bowed his head, pain shadowing his features. You should have trusted me. I did, she said softly. That's why I left. She tried to sit up, wincing. He helped her gently, careful of her fragile frame. I was followed, she continued. The night I disappeared, one of your men, someone loyal to your enemies, found out about the baby. They wanted leverage. I hid him in the basement. I didn't know if I'd make it out alive. Her voice trembled as she added, by the time I could breathe again, I realized the only way to keep him safe was to make you believe I was gone. Lorenzo clenched his fists, jaw tight. Who betrayed us? She shook her head. I don't know his name. But he wore your ring. The same one you gave to your top lieutenants. Antonio stiffened behind him. That means it's someone high up, someone close. Lorenzo's gaze hardened. Then we start there. But when he turned back to Elena, the fury in his eyes softened. You've carried this alone for years. She smiled faintly, her hand trembling as she touched his face. Every night, I wanted to believe you'd forgive me. But I couldn't risk it, not when he needed me. He took her hand gently. You shouldn't have had to choose. Outside, thunder rolled again. The boy flinched, running toward the bed. Elena gathered him close, her weak arms shaking. Matteo, she murmured, say hello to your father. The little boy's eyes lifted, confused, curious, and innocent. My father. Lorenzo swallowed hard. Yes, Matteo. I'm here now. Matteo tilted his head. Mama said my papa was a hero. A sad smile crossed Lorenzo's lips. She gave you too much credit for me. No, Elena whispered. I gave him the truth. Antonio stepped forward. We can't stay here. If someone betrayed her once, they'll come again when they realize you're gone from the city. Lorenzo nodded slowly. He looked at Elena, frail, yet fierce even in her weakness. I'll take you both somewhere safe, he said firmly. No one touches you again. But Elena shook her head. You can't protect us if you don't know who you're protecting us from. You need to finish what started 3 years ago. He hesitated. You think I'll leave you again? You won't have to, she said softly. You'll find the truth, and when you do, we'll finally be free. The boy yawned, curling up beside her. The candlelight flickered, painting soft shadows on the wall. A picture of the family fate had torn apart. Lorenzo rose quietly, turning toward the window. Rain streaked down the glass, and beyond it, the sea churned in restless gray. He whispered to himself, a child I never knew existed, a betrayal I never saw coming. He turned back to Elena, his voice low. Tell me where it began. Who found out first? She closed her eyes, exhausted. It started with a phone call. From someone inside your house. Someone who said they knew what I'd done. Ooh. Her lips parted. The name was Nico. Lorenzo froze. Nico, his oldest ally. His right hand. The man who had sworn loyalty to his bloodline. The betrayal cut deeper than any bullet could. The storm raged harder outside, wind howling through the cracks in the window. He turned toward Antonio, his eyes burning cold. Get me everything on Nico. Every call, every deal, every shadow he's touched. Antonio nodded, already reaching for his phone. Lorenzo looked once more at the woman and child on the bed. His lost love, his son, and knew what came next. He had found what he'd lost. Now, he had to destroy what had taken it from him. As he stepped outside, thunder roared over the coast. He whispered to the storm. They tried to bury you, Elena. But now they'll hear the sound of what they made me become. Morning broke over the Amalfi coast, like a secret whispered too softly. Golden light spilled over the cliffs, brushing the sea with warmth, but for Lorenzo De Luca, the sun brought no peace, only purpose. He stood on the balcony of a rented villa overlooking the waves, coat collar lifted against the breeze. Below, Antonio was already coordinating men, voices sharp through static radios. 3 years of silence had ended with one name, Nico. The man who had shared his table, his trust, his blood oath. The man who, if Elena's words were true, had sold both her and their child to the highest bidder. Lorenzo's hand tightened around the edge of the railing, until his knuckles went white. If he's alive, he murmured. He'll wish he wasn't. Before we continue this part of the story, tell us, where in the world are you listening from, and what time is it there? Now let's begin. Inside, the villa was quiet. Elena slept in the next room, her breathing shallow but steady. Matteo lay curled beside her, one small hand gripping her hair, as though afraid she'd vanish again. Lorenzo stood by the door for a long time, just watching. The way her lashes fluttered, the soft rise and fall of her chest. He didn't dare wake her. For the first time in years, he felt something almost like peace. And yet, the shadows outside were gathering. Antonio entered quietly. "The trail's faint," he said. "But it's there. Nico's been moving through Amalfi under another name. He's not alone. A few of your old men went with him." Lorenzo's expression didn't change. "How many? 5. Maybe 6. We can't be sure yet. But one thing's clear. He's working for the Gianetti syndicate now." The name chilled the air. Gianetti. The rival family that had hunted Lorenzo's empire for years. Ruthless, patient, waiting for a wound deep enough to strike. Lorenzo turned back toward the window, the reflection of the sea casting fractured light across his face. "So that's where the betrayal began. My own house." Antonio hesitated. "You should let me handle this. Stay with Alina, with the boy." But Lorenzo shook his head slowly. "You think I can rest while the man who tore my life apart still breathes?" He reached for his holster, sliding the gun into place. "No, Antonio, we end this. In Amalfi." By afternoon, the sky had clouded again, painting the coast in muted blues. The two men drove through the winding roads, the scent of salt and cypress filling the air. Amalfi's old quarter was alive with narrow streets, stone arches, and whispers. They parked near the harbor, blending into the crowd. Fishermen hauled nets. Tourists sipped espresso in the drizzle, and in the middle of it all, the past waited, hidden behind the facade of a quiet wine shop. Nico's new headquarters. Lorenzo entered alone. A bell chimed above the door. The scent of old wood and grapes filled the air. Behind the counter stood Nico, older, leaner, his once loyal eyes now cold and sharp. For a moment, neither man spoke. The silence stretched between them like a noose. "Lorenzo," Nico finally said, his voice casual, almost amused. "Didn't expect to see you on this side of the coast." Lorenzo's tone was calm, but every word carried quiet fury. "You should have. You left too many ghosts behind." Nico smirked. "I didn't leave them. You buried them yourself." Lorenzo stepped closer, the light catching the scar above his brow. A scar Nico himself had once stitched for him in their youth. "Tell me why, Nico. After everything we built, after everything I trusted you with, why her?" Nico poured himself a drink. "You think this was about her? You were slipping, Lorenzo. The empire was rotting from the inside, and you were too blinded by that pianist to see it. I did what needed to be done. You sold her. I saved us," Nico said quietly. "Gianetti offered peace, in exchange for her silence, for the child." Lorenzo's eyes darkened. There was no peace. There was betrayal. Nico laughed softly. "You always saw the world in black and white, you and your damned code of honor. But loyalty doesn't feed men, Lorenzo. Fear does." In one motion, Lorenzo grabbed Nico by the collar, slamming him against the counter. The glass shattered, red wine dripping like blood between them. "You had a choice," Lorenzo hissed. "You could have come to me." Nico's voice broke into a laugh that sounded half-crazed. "And die for a woman who would have destroyed you." She was never supposed to survive, Lorenzo. The deal went wrong because she ran. Lorenzo froze. "What did you say?" "She wasn't meant to make it out alive," Nico said, his grin fading into something darker. "Gianetti wanted her gone. I delivered her location, and they promised the boy would be taken care of. But she vanished before they reached her." A low hum of rage filled Lorenzo's ears. "You tried to have her killed." "I tried to keep you alive!" Nico roared. "Do you think Gianetti would have spared you if she talked? You had everything to lose, and I was the one who cleaned your mess." Lorenzo's grip tightened. The temptation to end it right there pulsed through his veins. But killing Nico now would be mercy. He leaned close, voice barely above a whisper. "Gianetti will come for me now that I've found her. But I'll make sure they find your body first." Nico's smirk faltered for the first time. "You wouldn't." Lorenzo released him abruptly, stepping back. "You've forgotten who I am." Outside, Antonio's men were already in position. Within minutes, Nico's small crew was surrounded. No gunfire, no chaos, just quiet, efficient justice. The kind that never reached the news. When Antonio rejoined Lorenzo on the street, his face was grim. "What do we do with him?" Lorenzo lit a cigarette, watching the waves crash against the pier. "Let him live with what he's done. That's worse than dying." He exhaled smoke into the sea air. "But keep him watched. If he breathes near her again, you know what to do." Antonio nodded silently. That night, back at the villa, Elena was awake when Lorenzo returned. Her face was pale, but her eyes, those soft, steady eyes, were waiting for him. You found him, she whispered. He nodded. He won't come near you again. She studied him, reading the storm in his silence. And you, did you find peace? He gave a faint, bitter smile. Not yet. She reached for his hand, her touch soft against the bruises on his knuckles. Then promise me something. When all this is over, don't become the man they made you to be. He looked at her for a long moment. You still believe there's something else in me? She smiled faintly. I always did. Even when you didn't. Outside, the wind carried the scent of the sea through the open window. The villa was quiet, but somewhere beyond Amalfi's glow, danger still lingered. Lorenzo stood at the window, watching the dark horizon. The rain had stopped, but the storm inside him had only just begun. Night fell heavy over the Amalfi coast, folding the world in velvet shadow. From the cliffs, the sea looked endless. Black glass reflecting the faint shimmer of moonlight. Inside the villa, silence had settled like a second skin. Lorenzo sat alone in the study, the faint hum of a storm far away echoing through the glass. The whiskey in his glass was untouched. A clock ticked somewhere in the room, steady, merciless. He should have felt relief. Nico was neutralized, the enemy disarmed, the woman he'd lost found again. But peace had never come easily to men like him. He had lived too long with deceit to trust quiet nights. And tonight, he was right not to. Before we begin this part of the story, tell us, where in the world are you listening from, and what time is it there? Now, let's continue. It began with a whisper of movement, a shadow crossing the courtyard, a car door shutting without headlights. Lorenzo rose instantly, hand to his gun. He moved through the villa in silence, steps light but deliberate, every sense sharpened. The hall smelled faintly of rain and gun oil. Antonio met him at the staircase, whispering, 3 men at the gate. No signal from the guards. Lorenzo's jaw tightened. Giannetti. Has to be. He nodded once. Get Elena and Matteo out. Back door, to the car. Now. Antonio's eyes flicked to the upper floor. What about you? Lorenzo chambered around. I'll buy you time. Upstairs, Elena had already woken. Mothers always knew before sound did. She clutched Matteo to her chest as Lorenzo entered the room. Her eyes widened. What's happening? He grabbed a duffel bag from the closet, tossing her a coat. You're leaving with Antonio. Don't argue. She stepped forward, her hand trembling as it caught his wrist. Lorenzo, you can't stay. I have to. She shook her head, voice breaking. Every time you say that, I lose you. He paused, meeting her eyes in the half-dark. You won't this time. Then, softer, I swear it. Gunfire cracked in the courtyard. Sudden, close. Glass shattered below. Matteo whimpered, clutching his mother's coat. Lorenzo's instincts screamed. He kissed the boy's forehead once, a gesture so quick and raw it startled even him. Go, he whispered. I'll find you. Elena's eyes filled with tears. Please. He cut her off with a look that said everything words couldn't. Then he turned, disappearing down the hall before her sob could follow him. The villa erupted into chaos. The guards were gone, bought, bribed, or dead. 3 men in black advanced through the main entrance, rifles drawn. They moved like soldiers, precise, unhurried, confident. Lorenzo took cover behind the marble column, steadying his breath. He counted steps, shadows, angles. Then 2 shots. Quick, controlled. 2 bodies fell. The 3rd man lunged toward the study. Lorenzo followed, silent as the storm outside. He caught the intruder near the stairs, slammed him against the wall, and ripped the mask off. His heart stopped. Not a Giannetti soldier. One of his own, Vito. Lorenzo breathed, disbelief cutting deeper than anger. You. The young man's face twisted. Shame, fear, defiance all at once. I had no choice, boss. No choice. Lorenzo's voice was low, deadly calm. You had a choice the day you took my oath. Vito swallowed. They had my sister, said they'd kill her if I didn't. A shot rang out before he could finish. Vito fell limp in Lorenzo's arms, eyes wide in frozen apology. The sound had come from the doorway. Lorenzo spun, and there, framed by the shattered light, stood Nico, alive and smiling. You didn't think I'd go down that easily, did you? Nico said, stepping over the broken glass, gun still smoking. You never did learn, Lorenzo. You can't bury the past, it claws its way back. Lorenzo raised his weapon. You're finished. Nico laughed softly. Finished? No, you are. Did you really think I'd let you take back what was mine? What was yours? She was supposed to be dead. Nico roared. You ruined everything the moment you went looking for her. Lorenzo's expression didn't waver. She was never yours to decide for. Nico sneered. She made you weak. You turned your back on everything we built. For what? A woman who played piano in your cage. For the first time, Lorenzo's control cracked. She gave me something you'll never understand. Peace. Peace. Nico spat. Then let's see how peaceful you are when she's gone for real. They moved almost simultaneously. 2 shots. One breaking glass, the other grazing Lorenzo's shoulder. He dropped behind the staircase, returning fire. Nico ducked behind the bar, bottles exploding around him. Smoke filled the room. Gunfire echoed sharp and final. When silence came, only one man stood. Lorenzo's hand shook slightly as he lowered his gun. Nico lay sprawled on the floor, eyes glassy, the faintest smile frozen on his lips. You always were quicker, he whispered. Then, blood bubbling in his throat. But they're coming for her anyway. His hand slipped from his chest, revealing a phone, still glowing. A message half sent. Target located. Woman and child, Amalfi Villa. Lorenzo's heart dropped. No, he grabbed the phone, smashing it against the floor. But the damage was done. Gianetti knew. He raced upstairs, blood soaking his sleeve. The back door stood open, wind rushing in. Lena. No answer. He ran through the rooms, panic cloying his chest, until he saw it, a drop of blood on the floor, a small stuffed wolf, lying in the doorway, and outside, the faint echo of tires screeching away into the night. He was too late. By the time Antonio returned, the house was in ruins. Boss. They took her, Lorenzo said hoarsely. Her and Matteo. Antonio froze. How? The car. They were waiting. Nico played us from the start. Lorenzo stared out into the darkness where the headlights had vanished, the sea crashing violently below. His voice was steady, but his eyes burned with something ancient and terrible. They think they've won. Antonio swallowed hard. What do we do now? Lorenzo turned, and for the first time in years, the cold, calculating man, the one the world feared, returned fully to life. We burn their world to the ground, he said quietly. And we don't stop until she's home. He walked to the broken piano in the corner of the room, its keys still echoing faintly from the fight. One key pressed down by accident. The same note that had once carried her lullaby. He whispered, half to the ghosts, half to himself. You played your melody in the dark, Elena. Now I'll finish the song in fire. The candlelight flickered across his face, and in that moment, the Mafia boss and the man he used to be became one. The storm had passed, but the night never really ended. A pale dawn hung over the Amalfi coast, casting the villa in a cold, colorless light. Every window was shattered. The air reeked of gunpowder and salt. Lorenzo sat at his desk, his injured arm bound in a torn shirt, staring at the scattered papers before him. Her handwriting, looping and elegant, smudged by tears and years. Letters. He had found them in the false bottom of her old piano bench. Dozens of them, sealed but never sent. Each envelope bore his name. Each one began the same way. Lorenzo, if you're reading this, it means I'm still trying to find the right words. He lit a cigarette he didn't want and opened the first letter. The ink had faded, but her voice felt alive between the lines. You told me once that love and loyalty can't exist in the same heart. But I think they can, if the love is strong enough to survive betrayal. He exhaled slowly, smoke curling through the dim light. Betrayal. The word cut like glass. He thought of Nico, of Vito, of the look in Elena's eyes, when she realized he'd stayed behind. Every choice he made had been a lie wrapped in the illusion of control. He reached for another letter. I dreamed of you again. Not the man the world fears, but the boy who used to hum when he thought no one was listening. I still remember the sound. It was always a lullaby, even when you didn't mean it to be. His throat tightened. He'd forgotten that. The melody. The habit. It had been something his mother taught him. To hum when the world grew too loud. And now, even the sound of it haunted him. Antonio entered quietly, holding a file. Boss. Intel from Naples. We found Gianetti's second compound. Northern Docks. Lorenzo didn't look up. Elena and Matteo. Still no sign. But, Antonio hesitated, lowering his voice. One of our men intercepted a message. They're moving 2 captives tomorrow night. Lorenzo crushed the cigarette in the ashtray. Location. Somewhere inland. The old convent outside Ravello. He's using the tunnels beneath it. Trafficking routes from the old war days. Lorenzo finally looked up, eyes sharp again. Good. Prepare the convoy. I want to move before sundown. Antonio nodded and turned to leave. But before he did, his gaze fell on the letters spread across the desk. Are those hers? Lorenzo didn't answer. He just gathered them into a neat pile, running his thumb along the edges as if afraid they'd vanish. When Antonio left, the silence returned, heavy and intimate. He picked up the next letter. If I ever disappear, don't look for me out of guilt. Look for me because you still believe we can be something other than what the world made us. His hand trembled. She'd known. Long before all this. She'd written to him from hiding, from fear. Maybe even from the same room, where she'd hidden the child he didn't know existed. And through every letter, she'd tried to keep him human. Hours later, the sun dipped low behind the cliffs. The convoy was ready, 3 black SUVs, armed men waiting for orders. Lorenzo stepped outside, the sea breeze whipping at his coat. He tucked one of the letters into his pocket, the last one, unopened. Antonio approached, adjusting his vest. You're bringing that? She wrote it after she left me. Lorenzo said quietly. Maybe she knew how this would end. Antonio frowned. You planning for an ending, boss? Lorenzo's eyes stayed on the horizon. No. I'm planning to make sure she gets to start again. The drive to Ravello was silent. Wending mountain roads, headlights cutting through the mist. As they neared the abandoned convent, rain began to fall again. Soft, relentless. The building loomed like a ghost from another century. Stone walls covered in ivy, stained glass shattered, the bell tower leaning slightly to one side. Antonio signaled the men. Thermal scans show movement. Northeast corridor, lower tunnels. Lorenzo nodded. We'll go quiet. No mistakes. They advanced through the courtyard, boots splashing in puddles, weapons raised. Inside, the air was damp and cold. Candles flickered in broken alcoves. Recent, meaning someone had been here hours ago. Then, faintly from somewhere deep below, a sound, a piano. He froze. It wasn't possible, but the melody drifted through the tunnels, the same lullaby she used to play. Soft, imperfect, trembling, as if someone's hands shook on the keys. Alana, he whispered. He motioned for Antonio to cover him and followed the sound. Heart pounding like a drum, the corridor narrowed into a staircase leading down into the old catacombs. The music grew louder, one hesitant note at a time. He turned the corner, and stopped. Elena sat at an old upright piano, chained at the wrist, eyes closed, fingers tracing the same melody she used to play in their old home. Beside her stood a guard, unaware of Lorenzo's presence. 2 shots. Quick. Precise. The man fell before he could reach for his gun. Elena gasped, spinning around. Her face pale, her eyes hollow from days of captivity. Lorenzo. He dropped his weapon and ran to her, cutting the chain with a blade from his belt. She fell into his arms, shaking, breathless. You came, she whispered. Of course I did, he said, holding her tighter than he ever had before. I always would. Tears streaked her cheeks. Matteo, they took him to the upper floor. Said they'd. He pulled back, cupping her face. Don't. I'll get him. But you have to promise me something. What? If I don't come back, you take this. He pressed the unopened letter into her hand. Your last words to me. Maybe they'll tell me what I never knew how to say. She stared at it, trembling. Don't talk like that. You will come back. He gave her a faint smile. Then you'll have to read it to me yourself. The rescue that followed was fast, brutal, and merciless. Lorenzo moved through the convent like a storm. Gunfire echoed through the halls, men shouting in panic as his team dismantled the Gianetti guards one by one. By the time he reached the upper chamber, only silence remained, and the faint sound of a child crying. He kicked open the last door, and there, in the corner, Matteo huddled, clutching a small toy wolf. Papa. The word hit him harder than any bullet ever could. Lorenzo dropped to his knees, pulling the boy into his arms. Yes, figlio mio. I'm here. The child buried his face in his father's coat, sobbing softly. For the first time, Lorenzo allowed himself to close his eyes and breathe. Later, as dawn broke over the cliffs of Ravello, they stood outside the ruined convent, mother, father, and son. Elena opened the letter he'd given her. Her hands shook as she unfolded the page, but her voice was steady as she read aloud. If there's ever a day when you find me again, don't let me speak first. Let me listen to the silence we both created, and the love that somehow survived it. When she finished, tears blurred her vision. Lorenzo took the letter from her gently, folding it back into his coat. We've both said enough, he murmured. Now we live what's left. She smiled faintly, resting her head against his shoulder. And if the past comes back, he looked out over the dawn. The sea calm, the horizon pink and forgiving. Then we write another letter, he said quietly, and this time we send it. Morning came softly, with gold spilling over the horizon and touching the Amalfi cliffs like a benediction. For the first time in weeks, the villa was silent. No gunfire, no orders, no fear threading through the halls. Alina stood by the balcony, wrapped in one of Lorenzo's shirts. The air smelled of salt and lemon groves. Below, she could see Matteo running along the stone path, chasing the white doves that gathered near the fountain. It should have felt like peace. But it didn't. Because peace, she had learned, wasn't the absence of noise. It was the weight of everything you tried not to remember. Lorenzo entered quietly, his right arm still bound, the faint shadow of exhaustion beneath his eyes. He set a small wooden box on the table. I found something in the old safe at Ravello, he said. Giannetti kept records. Names, payments, he hesitated. And something else. Alina turned, brushing her hair from her face. What kind of something? He opened the box. Inside was a photograph. Faded, creased, the corners frayed. Elena felt her knees weaken. It was a picture of her, taken years ago. She was standing outside the music conservatory in Milan, smiling, holding a single rose. But beside her was another man. A man she hadn't seen in years, Marco D'Angelo. The one who'd helped her disappear. The one who had known where she went. Lorenzo's voice was low, controlled. The date on the back is the same week you vanished. She looked at him, heart pounding. It's not what you think. His jaw tightened. Then tell me what it is. Alina moved closer, trembling. Marco wasn't. He wasn't what he seemed. He worked for Giannetti. I didn't know at first. You didn't know. His voice cracked with disbelief. You just happened to hide with one of Giannetti's lieutenants. Elena, he was my enemy. I didn't know, she cried. I was pregnant, terrified, and running from your world. From you. He promised to help me disappear, to protect me until it was safe. I didn't realize who he really was until. She stopped. Lorenzo stepped forward, eyes blazing. Until what? Her voice dropped to a whisper. Until he told me the only way to keep my child safe was to give him up. Silence. Outside, the wind carried the sound of distant waves breaking against the rocks. You were going to give Matteo away? Lorenzo asked, his tone hollow. Tears filled her eyes. I thought I had to. You don't understand. Giannetti knew about the baby before you did. He sent men after me. Marco told me if I stayed hidden, he could make them believe the child never survived. It was the only way. Lorenzo turned away, gripping the balcony rail until his knuckles whitened. The sea stretched endlessly below them, blue and merciless. You should have trusted me, he said finally. He should have told me. Alina stepped closer, placing her hand on his back. You were at war, Lorenzo. Every man who got close to you ended up dead. I couldn't let that happen to our son. He turned, eyes glistening. Not with anger this time, but something far more fragile, pain, regret. And now, he asked softly, now that he knows my name, my world. She swallowed. Now, we have to protect him together. Later that afternoon, while Lorenzo made calls to secure new identities for his family, Elena wandered through the study. The villa was filled with remnants of lives he never spoke of. Old books, records, photos of his mother before she died. On the desk, beside the photograph from Ravello, she noticed another image, newer, printed from a phone. It showed Matteo asleep, his small hand resting on Lorenzo's chest. Her breath caught. Lorenzo had taken it while she slept, she realized. The light in the picture was tender, almost reverent. She traced her fingers over the image, then over the old one beside it. The past and the present, side by side. One taken by betrayal, the other by love. And between them, the life they were still trying to build. That evening, when the sky burned orange and pink over the horizon, she found Lorenzo outside by the sea wall, skipping stones across the waves. She carried the photograph from Ravello in her hand. You kept it, she said quietly. He didn't turn. I wanted to remember what I didn't understand. Elena sat beside him, knees touching. You think this picture means I betrayed you. But it's not proof of betrayal. It's proof of how far I was willing to go to survive. He finally looked at her, searching her face for something he could hold on to. You never sent those letters, he said. Now I know why. You didn't want me to find you. She shook her head. I didn't want to destroy you. You were trying to leave the life behind. If I came back, I would have pulled you under again. He gave a faint, broken laugh. And yet here we are. Elena smiled sadly. And here we are. They sat in silence for a while, the sound of the tide filling the space between them. Finally, Lorenzo spoke. Do you ever think we were doomed from the beginning? She turned to him, eyes glistening in the fading light. No. I think we were unfinished. Later that night, after Matteo had fallen asleep and the house had gone still, Lorenzo returned to the study. He poured himself a glass of whiskey, and stared again at the two photographs, the past and the present. Then, with deliberate care, he tore the one from Ravello in half, not out of anger. Out of release. He took a lighter from the drawer and watched as the flames consumed the image, curling it into ash. When only smoke remained, he whispered, "No more ghosts." Then he placed the newer photo, the one of Elena and Matteo, inside his wallet, next to an old rosary he still carried from his mother. For the first time in years, he felt something shift inside him. It wasn't peace. Not yet, but it was the beginning of forgiveness. The next morning, Antonio entered with news. "Boss," he said, "we traced the photo's origin. It wasn't Giannetti who took it. It came from a file marked property of the commission. Someone higher than him was watching her." Lorenzo's brow furrowed. The commission? Antonio nodded grimly. They knew about Matteo long before Giannetti did. They may still have leverage, photos, documents, maybe even a claim. Lorenzo's expression hardened, the quiet in his eyes darkening again. "So this isn't over," he murmured. Antonio shook his head. "Not even close." Lorenzo glanced toward the window, where Elena stood in the garden holding their son's hand. Sunlight catching her hair, laughter breaking softly through the breeze. He clenched his fist around the wallet in his pocket. "No one," he said, voice low and final, "is taking my family again." Rain returned that night. Not the kind that screams against glass, but the kind that whispers, soft, endless, the kind that pulls memories out of hiding. The villa lights glowed warm against the storm, and somewhere inside, the echo of a lullaby lingered. Elena's voice, faint but steady, singing their son to sleep. Lorenzo watched from the doorway, his hand resting on the frame. Matteo was curled against her, his small hand tangled in her hair, eyes fluttering closed. For a man who'd lived through blood and betrayal, this simple, quiet sight, was the thing that undid him. When she finally looked up, their eyes met across the dim room. No words, no need. Just the silence of two people who had lost too much time. Later, when the boy was asleep, Elena joined him on the terrace. The sea was restless again, the horizon blurred with lightning. She wrapped her shawl tighter. "He had another nightmare," she said softly. "I called out for you this time." Lorenzo's gaze lingered on the dark water. He shouldn't have to call for anyone. He should sleep without fear. Elena turned toward him. "He's your son. He has your eyes. He'll have your strength too." He gave a faint, humorless smile. "Strength is the one thing I wish he'd never inherit from me." The wind picked up, scattering the rain against the marble floor. For a while, they just stood there, close enough to feel each other's warmth, far enough that the years between them still hung in the air. Finally, Elena broke the silence. "You never told me what happened the night you found the crib." Lorenzo's jaw tightened. "You mean the night I realized the life I built was built on lies?" Her expression softened. "You think I wanted to leave you with that lie? I think you didn't believe I'd choose you over everything else," he said quietly. "And maybe you were right." She looked at him for a long moment, her eyes shimmering in the lightning's brief glow. "Do you still love me, Lorenzo?" He turned to her, and for the first time, the mask he wore around the world slipped. "I never stopped," he said simply. "I tried to bury it under vengeance, under guilt, under everything this life turned me into. But it never went away." Her lips parted, trembling. "Then why does it still hurt?" He reached out, his hand hovering near her cheek, but not quite touching. "Because love doesn't erase pain. It just reminds you it was real." They didn't speak after that. The silence between them was enough. Inside, the clock ticked softly, an old family heirloom, marking the slow passing of hours they'd never get back. When midnight came, Lorenzo poured 2 glasses of wine and joined her by the fire. He handed her one. "Do you remember the night we met?" Elena smiled faintly. "You mean when you pretended to be a stranger in my father's gallery?" He chuckled, a sound so rare it startled even him. "You knew who I was." "I knew," she admitted, swirling the wine in her glass. "But you were nothing like I expected. You looked at the paintings like they meant something." "They did," he said. "They reminded me that not everything beautiful has to be stolen." She laughed softly. Then her expression turned wistful. Do you ever miss that version of us? The one before the lies? The one before the world, she said. He thought for a long moment. Every day. The next morning, sunlight finally broke through the clouds. Golden, fragile, like hope trying to return. Lorenzo found Matteo in the garden, kneeling beside a small patch of roses with a watering can. Papa, the boy said with a grin. Look, they're alive again. Lorenzo knelt beside him, smiling. You think so? Matteo nodded. Mama says when you take care of something, it grows back. Even if it looks broken. Lorenzo froze, the words hitting him deeper than the boy could ever know. He brushed a hand over Matteo's hair. She's right, he whispered. She always was. That afternoon, Elena went to the town square for the first time since returning. The Amalfi Coast was alive again. Fishermen shouting, children chasing pigeons, the smell of espresso in the air. And there, among the crowd, she saw a face she hadn't seen in nearly 8 years. An old man with silver hair and a cane, wearing the same worn coat he'd always favored. Her father, Elena. His voice broke on her name. She froze, tears already stinging her eyes. Papa. He reached for her hand, trembling. I thought. They told me you were dead. She shook her head, tears spilling freely now. I had to disappear. I thought it was the only way. Her father cupped her face in his weathered hands. You looked just like your mother when she came back to me the first time. Tired, but still full of fire, Elena laughed through her tears, clutching his hands tightly. I have a son now. His name's Matteo. The old man's smile faltered. Does he know about your mother's side of the family? Elena hesitated. Not yet. Then it's time. Her father said softly. The past doesn't go away because you hide it, figlia mia. It just waits for you to come home. When she returned to the villa that evening, Lorenzo was waiting at the door. He saw her face and froze. What happened? She smiled faintly. I saw him. My father, he's alive. Lorenzo's eyes widened. He was supposed to be. I know, she said, stepping closer. But he's here. He forgave me. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Lorenzo reached out, brushing a strand of hair from her face. Maybe it's time we both started forgiving the ghosts we've been carrying. Elena looked up at him, eyes glimmering with a mix of sorrow and hope. Does that mean you've forgiven me? He didn't answer with words. He simply pulled her into his arms and held her. Long, tight, like a man who'd been drowning for years and finally reached the shore. They stood like that for a long time. The rain had stopped, and through the open windows, the sound of waves rolled softly against the cliffs. When she finally pulled back, her voice was barely a whisper. You always said you hated rain. But it's always been there when we find each other again. He smiled faintly. Maybe it's not the rain I hated. Maybe it's what it reminded me of. All the things I thought I'd lost. Elena leaned up, her forehead resting against his. And what about now? He closed his eyes, breathing her in. Now I think I finally know what home feels like. That night, long after the house had gone quiet, Lorenzo stood on the balcony alone, looking out at the sea. For the first time, he wasn't planning, calculating, or guarding. He was just feeling. Behind him, Elena's voice floated softly through the open door. Come to bed. He turned, and the sight of her there, barefoot in the half-light, wearing the same necklace he'd given her years ago, was enough to make his heart ache. As he crossed the room, the clock struck midnight. And in that moment, he realized something simple, something devastating. They weren't just reunited. They were being given a second chance. And this time, he wasn't going to waste it. The morning was too calm, almost unnaturally so, the kind of silence that hides a storm. The villa glowed in the first light of dawn. But Lorenzo could already feel it. The shift in the air, the faint hum of tension crawling beneath the peace. Years in the underworld had sharpened his instincts, and they whispered the same warning now: something is coming. He was sitting by the window, half-dressed, a cigarette burning forgotten between his fingers. Elena was still asleep, her hair spilling across the pillow like ink on silk. For the first time in years, he'd let himself believe that maybe, just maybe, they could have a life beyond the past. But peace, in his world, was never a gift, it was a countdown. By noon, the call came. Boss. Enzo's voice crackled through the line. We got a problem. Someone's been digging through the old archives. Files about the Ferrara deal, and... He hesitated. Your father's name came up. Lorenzo's grip on the phone tightened. That's impossible. Those files were destroyed. Apparently not all of them. Someone leaked a copy to the commission. They've called an emergency council tonight. You're on the agenda. Lorenzo's heart went still. The commission. The 12 heads who ruled the Italian syndicate. If they had reopened Ferrara's case, it meant one thing: someone was preparing to challenge his authority. Find out who did it, he said coldly, and hung up. When he turned, Elena was standing in the doorway. She'd heard everything. You can't go, she said quietly. It's a trap. He looked at her, the old armor sliding back into place. If I don't, they'll come here. They'll find you. Matteo? Everything? She stepped forward, anger flashing through her tears. Lorenzo, this is what they want. To pull you back into that life. To make you forget what you've built. His jaw tightened. You think I can forget? Her voice trembled. I think you want to. You want to believe you can still fix everything. The business, your family, your father's legacy. But you can't fight ghosts, Lorenzo. He crossed to her slowly, his hands resting on her shoulders. I'm not fighting ghosts, he said. I'm fighting the people who keep turning them into weapons. Elena stared at him, silent. Then, almost in a whisper, she said, there's something I never told you. He froze. What? She swallowed hard, looking down. The night I disappeared, I wasn't just running from your enemies. I was running from your father. The world seemed to tilt. Lorenzo's eyes darkened. My father is dead, Elena. Yes, she said. But before he died, he came to me. He wanted to make sure I understood something. He said that if you ever discovered the truth behind Ferrara, you'd destroy yourself. Lorenzo's breath caught. What truth? She hesitated. And that hesitation was enough to make his pulse start to pound. Elena, he said slowly, dangerously calm. What did he tell you? She closed her eyes. That the Ferrara massacre wasn't ordered by your rivals. It was ordered by your father, and carried out under your name. Lorenzo went cold. Completely, utterly cold. The cigarette dropped from his hand, burning out on the marble. He took a slow step back, like the air itself had betrayed him. No, that's not possible. I was there. I saw the bodies. I buried the truth because I thought I was responsible. That's what he wanted you to believe. Elena said softly. He set you up. He wanted a successor who could carry the guilt. Who could take the blame and never look back. Lorenzo's voice broke into a low, furious whisper. You knew. All these years you knew. Tears filled her eyes. He made me swear not to tell you. He said if you found out too soon, the commission would destroy you. That they'd never let the son of a traitor lead them. The room fell into silence, thick as fog. For a long time, neither of them moved. Then Lorenzo turned toward the window, the rain beginning again beyond the glass, soft, relentless. When he finally spoke, his voice was hollow. Every man I killed, every deal I made, every night I thought I was fighting to redeem my family name. I was only protecting his sins. Elena reached for him. Lorenzo. He stepped away. No, not now. That night, the commission met in Naples. The old cathedral where they gathered was as much a monument as it was a tomb. 12 men sitting beneath vaulted ceilings, each with blood on their hands and secrets in their eyes. Lorenzo entered without a word, his black coat trailing behind him like a shadow. Lorenzo Romano, said Don Vitale, the eldest of them. You stand accused of concealing your father's betrayal, and of profiting from the massacre of Ferrara. Do you deny it? Lorenzo's gaze swept across the table. I deny the lie. Not the blood. Vitale raised an eyebrow. You admit it. I admit that I took lives, Lorenzo said coldly. But not for Ferrara. I did it because I believed in justice. The kind this council forgot how to deliver. A murmur rippled through the room. One of the younger dons leaned forward. You speak of justice like it absolves you. It doesn't, Lorenzo said. But it explains me. He paused, then placed a small envelope on the table. That's the truth you've been searching for. The original file. The proof that my father orchestrated Ferrara. He signed it himself, and buried the evidence under my name. Gasps erupted. Vettel's hand trembled slightly as he unfolded the document. His eyes flickered with disbelief and fear. This, he whispered. If this is true, the commission has been built on a lie. Lorenzo's voice cut through the chamber like a blade. No. It's been built on silence. I'm just the first one who's done pretending not to hear it. When the meeting ended, Lorenzo walked out into the rain alone. He didn't feel triumph. Only emptiness. The truth was out, and it had cost him everything. As he stepped into the waiting car, his phone buzzed once. A message from Enzo. Unknown men at the villa. We tried to stop them. Elena and Matteo gone. The phone slipped from his hand. The world turned red. He drove through the night, the road twisting like a blade through the hills. Every second burned. Every memory screamed. When he reached the villa, the doors were wide open. A single rose petal trailed across the floor, leading to the broken piano, the one he'd gifted Elena years ago. On the keys lay a note, scrawled in black ink, "The past always collects its debts," and beneath it, a single cufflink, the emblem of the Vital family. Lorenzo stood there in the dark, chest heaving, the storm roaring outside. The truth had been told, but now, the war was beginning. He looked down at the note one last time, his reflection fractured across the polished piano lid. The face of a man who'd lost too much to ever go back. Then he whispered, almost to himself, "You took my family once. You won't survive it the second time." And as thunder split the sky, Lorenzo Romano, the son, the lover, the ghost, became once again what the world feared most, a man with nothing left to lose. The night was heavy with the scent of smoke and salt. Somewhere beyond the cliffs, fire burned, a steady orange glow against the black horizon. The Vital estate was gone. Lorenzo stood at the edge of the hill, watching the flames devour the last remains of the men who had stolen his peace, his family, his trust. His coat whipped violently in the coastal wind, and for a moment, he looked like part of the storm, wild, unyielding, alone. It should have felt like victory. It didn't. The revenge that had been building in his blood for years, the one his father had taught him to crave, felt hollow now. The fire roared, but inside him there was only quiet. "Boss." Enzo's voice came through the earpiece. "We've cleared everyone out. The Vital hair didn't make it. It's over." Lorenzo's jaw tightened. He didn't answer right away. His eyes stayed on the burning structure below, the windows cracking like breaking glass hearts. "Nothing's ever over," he said finally, his voice low. "Not when blood built it." Then he tore the earpiece out and turned toward his car. The drive back to Amalfi felt endless. Rain began halfway down the mountain, falling so hard it blurred the road ahead. Lightning split the sky, painting brief flashes of the sea, black and endless. Elena had been moved to a safe house. Matteo was asleep somewhere, unaware of the world his father was trying to bury in fire and ashes. And yet, every road Lorenzo took only led him deeper into his own guilt. When he reached the villa, dawn was creeping across the coast, a pale, trembling light. He entered the house silently. The walls smelled of salt and lemon oil, but also of memory. Every step he took seemed to echo through the past. Laughter, piano music, her voice. He found Elena on the balcony, wrapped in a blanket, staring at the horizon. She didn't turn when he entered. "You burned it down," she said quietly. Lorenzo stopped. "You heard." "I saw," she said. "Half the coast did." The wind caught her hair, tossing it gently across her face. She didn't move to fix it. Her voice was steady, but her hands were shaking slightly, the way they used to when she was trying not to cry. He took a step closer. "They had Matteo." "They?" "I know." Her words cut softly through the air. "I know why you did it, Lorenzo. I just don't know what it cost you this time." He didn't answer. Instead, he looked past her, to the faint curl of smoke still visible far down the coast. When he finally spoke, his voice sounded tired. "I thought it would make me feel clean again. Like burning away everything my father left behind would erase what I became." Elena turned then, her eyes meeting his, raw, unguarded. "And did it?" He shook his head. "No. The fire doesn't forgive. It just hides the scars for a while." She rose slowly from the chair, stepping toward him. "You can't keep fighting ghosts, Lorenzo. You'll burn yourself before they do." His hands clenched at his sides. "It's all I know." "No," she said, her voice suddenly fierce. "It's all you were taught. But look at what's still here." She placed a trembling hand on his chest. "Your heart is still beating. Matteo is still alive. I'm still here. What else do you need to understand that you're allowed to stop?" He stood frozen, the words sinking through years of armor. The sound of rain returned, steady against the glass, like applause from heaven for the first truth spoken between them in years. "Elena." His voice broke on her name. "I don't know how to stop." She looked up at him then, tears glimmering like small stars. "Then let me help you." Her arms slipped around him, gently, as though afraid he might shatter. For a long time, neither of them spoke. The only sound was rain, wind, and the slow return of breathing. When he finally exhaled, it came out like surrender, like forgiveness trying to find a way back home. Hours later they sat by the fireplace. The flames here were different. Calm, human, warm. Elena held a letter in her lap, one she'd found among the ashes of the Vital house before she fled. It was old, the ink faded. She handed it to Lorenzo. It was your father's, she said quietly. One of his last letters before he died. Addressed to you. He hesitated, then unfolded it. The words, shaky and uneven, were written in his father's distinct, sharp handwriting. My son, when you read this, I will be gone. Perhaps the world will call me a monster. They are not wrong. But everything I destroyed, I did believing I was saving you. You were never meant for this life, Lorenzo. I dragged you into my sins, and made you think they were your inheritance. They weren't. Your real inheritance is love. The kind I never knew how to give. If there's still light left in you, let it find her. Let it find peace. Forgive me, not for what I did, but for what I turned you into. Giovanni Romano. When Lorenzo finished, he sat still for a long time. The firelight flickered across his face, tracing the wet lines beneath his eyes. He folded the letter gently, like something sacred, and set it down beside the flames. I hated him, he said softly. For years. I wanted to destroy everything he built. But I never realized he already had. Elena reached across the space between them, her hand finding his. Then maybe it's time to build something different. He looked at her, eyes wary but alive. Like what? She smiled faintly. Something that doesn't burn. That night, they went down to the old basement. The place where it all began. The crib still sat in the corner, untouched since the night everything fell apart. Lorenzo stood beside it, his reflection dim in the shadows. This is where I found the note, he murmured. Where I thought I'd lost you forever. Elena stepped beside him, her voice soft. And this is where you'll finally let go. She picked up the old note. The one scrawled with those haunting words. She said you'd never believe her. Then she set it gently into the small bowl of fire he'd brought from upstairs. They watched as the paper curled and turned to ash, the words fading into smoke. For the first time, the fire didn't feel like punishment. It felt like release. As the last ember died, Lorenzo turned toward her. I've done unforgivable things, he said quietly. But if there's still a way to start over. There is, she whispered, her hand resting over his heart. You just did. He pulled her close then, not out of desperation or guilt, but something softer. Something human. Outside the rain eased. The storm had passed, and in the glow of the dying fire, two broken hearts began to forgive what the past had tried so hard to destroy. The first thing he heard was the clock. Its ticking was slow, uneven, like a heartbeat struggling to remember how to live. Lorenzo opened his eyes to a blur of white light. For a moment, he thought he was dead. The smell of antiseptic, the distant murmur of voices, the softness beneath his hands. None of it belonged to the world he knew. Then came the pain. Sharp, crawling up his ribs, anchoring him back to the cruel reality of survival. He tried to move but his body refused. A shadow appeared beside him. Soft hands, trembling slightly, adjusting the IV drip. Elena, he whispered. Her face came into focus slowly, like dawn through fog. She was there, pale, sleepless, her eyes swollen from crying. When she saw his lips move, her breath hitched. You're awake, she said softly. God, Lorenzo. He tried to speak again, but the words caught in his throat. His memory returned in fragments. The explosion at the Vital docks, the fire, Enzo's voice shouting his name, and then nothing. Elena, he rasped. Matteo. He's safe, she said quickly. He's with Carmela at the safe house. You saved him. Relief hit him so hard he almost laughed. But it came out as a cough. She reached for a glass of water, her hands shaking as she lifted it to his lips. For a moment, there was nothing but silence, her fingertips brushing his eyes searching hers for something he was afraid to name. How long? He asked finally. 3 days, she whispered. You were unconscious. The doctors didn't know if you'd wake up. He turned his head toward the window. Outside, the world was drenched in gold, the sea catching the sunlight like melted glass. It looked peaceful, unreal, undeserving. Elena, he said after a long pause. Why did you come back? You could have run. Her lips parted, and for a moment she didn't answer. Then, in a voice that trembled like a confession, she said, because I couldn't lose you again. Not like that. Not after everything. Lorenzo closed his eyes. The sound of her voice, fragile, honest, tore through him. You should hate me, he murmured. After all the lies. After all the blood. I tried, she said, her tone breaking into a whisper. God knows I tried. But every time I closed my eyes, I still saw the man who carried our son out of that burning house. The man who never stopped searching for truth, even when it destroyed him. Tears slipped down her face. She leaned forward, her forehead resting gently against his arm. You don't have to be your father's shadow anymore, Lorenzo. You've already paid his debt. He looked at her. Really looked. And for the first time in years, he didn't see the woman who'd left him. He saw the one who'd survived with him. That night, when the hospital was quiet, she brought out a small, crumpled envelope. I was going to burn this, she said. But it belongs to you. He recognized the handwriting instantly. His father's. Lorenzo took it with shaking hands, unfolded the brittle paper, and began to read. My son, if you are reading this, it means you've uncovered what I did. I won't ask for forgiveness. I don't deserve it, but I want you to understand why. The Ferrara massacre was not about power, it was about protection. Someone threatened your mother. They said they would take you. Use you. I made a deal with the devil to save you. And in the end, I became him. I built an empire out of blood so you could inherit peace, but perhaps that was my greatest sin. Believing peace can be built on pain. If love still exists in your world, hold on to it. It's the only thing worth disobeying me for. Giovanni Romano. Lorenzo's hands trembled as the letter fell from his fingers. Elena quietly gathered it, folded it back, and pressed it against his chest. You don't have to carry his guilt anymore, she said softly. He already confessed it for you. For a long time, neither of them spoke. Only the wind outside, brushing against the hospital window, and the faint rhythm of their breathing. Then, slowly, Lorenzo reached for her hand. Elena, he whispered, after everything, do you still believe in us? Her eyes lifted to his. I believe, she said, that we've both been haunted long enough. And she kissed him. Not with desperation, not with sorrow, but with something quieter, deeper, a promise born of pain and forgiveness. Days later, the world seemed to soften. The syndicate had gone silent. The Vital estate burned to ashes, the commission fractured. Anzo came to the hospital once, bringing news that the remaining families had called for truce. They say it's over, he told Lorenzo. That the Romano name is cleared. But Lorenzo only nodded. He didn't care for power anymore. He'd seen too much of what it cost. When the doctor finally cleared him to leave, Elena wheeled him out onto the terrace overlooking the coast. The sun was setting, bleeding gold and crimson into the water. He closed his eyes, breathing in the salt, the warmth, the peace he'd chased his entire life. Do you remember? She said quietly, the first night you played that song for me. The one you wrote after Ferrara. He smiled faintly. The melody without an ending. Yes. She brushed his cheek. Maybe it has one now. Later that evening, they returned to the villa, rebuilt, scarred, but standing. In the basement, the crib still sat in the corner, untouched. The blanket inside was faded, the wood carved with tiny initials MR. Lorenzo stood there for a long while, one hand resting on the edge. Everything started here, he murmured. Elena joined him, her voice low. No. Everything broke here. What starts again? That's up to us. He turned to her, eyes glassy in the soft light. Do you really think we can start again? She smiled faintly, brushing her thumb against his scarred knuckles. I think love isn't about starting again. It's about choosing not to end. He let out a long breath, part laugh, part sigh, and drew her close. Outside, the night wind whispered through the lemon trees, carrying the scent of salt and memory. Somewhere beyond the cliffs, the church bells rang. Slow, distant, forgiving. Lorenzo whispered against her hair. Between life and memory, I choose you. And for the first time in years, the past fell silent. The sea was calm that morning. A mirror of silver and blue stretching far beyond the cliffs. For the first time in years, the waves didn't sound like echoes of war, they sounded like breathing. The Romano villa had been rebuilt, not into a fortress, but a home. No guards at the gate, no men in black suits waiting by the drive. Just lemon trees swaying in the wind, and a piano near the window where sunlight pooled like honey. Elena stood by the railing of the terrace, her hair lifting gently in the ocean breeze. She closed her eyes and listened to the world. The waves, the distant bells from Amalfi, the cry of seagulls gliding low over the cliffs. Peace. It had always felt like a myth before. Now it was real enough to touch. Behind her, soft footsteps approached. Lorenzo. He still carried a shadow in his eyes. He probably always would. But his movements had changed. There was no more tension in the way he walked, no coldness in his silence, just quiet presence. He came to stand beside her, his hand brushing against hers. "You're up early," he murmured. "So are you," she replied with a faint smile. He looked out over the sea, the morning sun gilding the horizon. "Couldn't sleep." "The sound of the waves." He paused, then smiled a little. "It's strange, but it makes me restless. Guess I'm still not used to peace." Elena turned toward him, studying his face. The faint stubble on his jaw, the new softness in his eyes. "You will be," she said. "Peace takes practice too." Down below, Matteo's laughter carried through the courtyard. He was chasing the gardener's dog, the small white pup darting between lemon trees. The boy's giggles rising with every splash of sea air. Lorenzo leaned on the railing, watching him. There was a look in his eyes Elena hadn't seen in years, something unguarded, tender. "He doesn't remember any of it," she said softly. "He shouldn't," Lorenzo replied. "That's what I wanted for him. A life that doesn't begin in fear." Elena's gaze lingered on him. "And you? What kind of life do you want now?" He hesitated. "One that doesn't end in revenge." She smiled faintly, brushing his hand with her fingertips. "Then it's already begun." That evening, they cooked together, something so ordinary, it felt almost strange. Elena kneaded dough while Lorenzo chopped basil. His sleeves rolled up, the faintest hint of amusement in his expression as flour dusted her cheek. "I never thought I'd see the day you'd cook," she teased. He glanced at her. "I was trained to handle knives." She laughed. A soft, surprised laugh that echoed through the kitchen. It was the kind of sound he hadn't realized he'd missed until now. For a moment, he just watched her. The way the light fell on her face. The curve of her smile, the quiet steadiness of her presence. There had been a time when even moments like this felt impossible. Now they were everything. Later after dinner, Matteo fell asleep on the sofa, curled up with the dog and a small toy car clutched in his hand. Elena tucked him in, brushing a kiss across his forehead. Lorenzo stood in the doorway, his gaze soft. "He looks like you," he said. She turned, smiling gently. "Everyone says he has your eyes." He stepped closer, his voice low. "I used to think having a home meant power, money, control. But looking at this, I think I finally understand what my father meant when he said love was the only inheritance worth protecting." Elena reached for him, her fingers tracing the faint scar on his cheek. "The one left from that final night of fire." "He was right," she said, "but you had to lose everything to see it." Lorenzo nodded, his hand coming up to cover hers. "And if I ever forget, promise you'll remind me." She smiled. "Always." They walked down to the beach later, the moon hanging low over the water, the world reduced to light, salt and silence. The tide washed gently over their bare feet. The sand was cool, smooth, endless. Elena looked up at the stars. "When I was hiding in the north," she said quietly, "I used to think about this place, about what it would be like if one day, all the noise just stopped." He looked at her, his voice rough but warm. "And now that it has," she smiled faintly, "now it's too quiet. I might have to make you play the piano again." He chuckled under his breath. "You remember that melody?" "I remember every note." He reached for her hand. "Then maybe it's time I finished it." That night, the house filled with music. The piano had been silent for years, but under his touch, it breathed again, soft, hesitant, then strong. Elena sat nearby, her head resting on her arms as she listened. The melody he played was the same one he'd written for her long ago, unfinished, frozen in grief. But now, he found the ending. Not in sorrow, in hope. The final chord hung in the air like a sigh of peace, fading into the hum of the sea outside. When the last note disappeared, Elena rose and walked to him. "That was beautiful," she whispered. He looked up at her. "It's the sound of forgiveness." She smiled, leaning down to kiss him softly, then never stopped playing. In the morning, sunlight spilled through the windows, painting gold over the walls. Matteo's laughter echoed again through the villa. Small feet on tile, the sound of a wooden toy clattering across the floor. Lorenzo sat on the terrace with a cup of coffee, watching the waves. Elena joined him, her hair still tousled from sleep, a light shawl around her shoulders. "This place," she said softly, looking out at the sea. "It finally feels like home." He nodded slowly. "It is." She turned to him. "Do you ever think about leaving it all behind? Going somewhere new?" He smiled faintly. "I already have. The man who once lived here is gone." She slipped her hand into his, and they sat in silence. The kind of silence that didn't need to be filled. Below them, the waves rolled on, tireless and eternal. the world was still, and for once, it was enough. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Elena stood on the balcony alone. The sky burned orange and pink, and the sea mirrored every shade. Lorenzo came to stand behind her, his arms sliding gently around her waist. She leaned back against him, her voice a whisper. "Do you think love ever really ends?" He pressed a kiss against her hair. "No," he said softly, "it just finds a home." She smiled through quiet tears, watching the horizon fade into gold. And somewhere, between the sound of the sea and the rhythm of two hearts learning to rest, the story that began in pain finally exhaled in peace. The morning sun poured over the cliffs like liquid gold. The Amalfi coast shimmered, alive and quiet, the waves whispering secrets to the shore. For the first time in years, there were no shadows trailing Lorenzo Romano, no men watching from dark corners, no whispers of revenge, no ghosts of the past pacing in his chest. Only the sound of life. He stood at the edge of the balcony, coffee in hand, the sea stretching wide and endless before him. Below, the laughter of his son mingled with the cry of gulls, and Elena's voice carried from the garden as she called Matteo inside for breakfast. It was such a simple scene, so ordinary, and yet, to Lorenzo, it felt like a miracle. When Elena appeared beside him, sunlight caught her hair, turning it to spun amber. She wore a soft white dress, her feet bare, her smile gentle in that way that always unarmed him. Lost in thought again, she teased softly. He turned toward her. "Maybe. Or maybe I'm just trying to remember what peace feels like." Elena tilted her head. "You don't have to remember it anymore," she said. "You're living it." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The wind tugged gently at her hair. From the kitchen, Matteo's laughter rang out again, pure and bright. And Lorenzo, who once believed he was destined only for blood and regret, realized he finally had everything he never dared to ask for. Later that day, they took Matteo into town. Amalfi bathed in afternoon light, the narrow streets alive with scent and song. The shopkeepers waved, some still glancing twice when they saw Lorenzo. But there was no fear in their eyes anymore. Just curiosity, and a hint of respect. Elena carried a basket of lemons and sea salt, Matteo clutching her hand and babbling about the toy boat he wanted from the market. Lorenzo followed, one step behind, content to watch the two of them move through the crowd like a dream he had once thought impossible. When they passed the old church, the bells began to toll. The sound was low, steady, not mournful, but forgiving. Elena turned to look up at the tower, her eyes soft. "Do you ever think about the others?" she asked. Lorenzo nodded slowly. "Every day. But I don't hate them anymore." "That's forgiveness," she said quietly. He looked at her. "No," he murmured. "That's love." That evening, after the town had quieted, they walked down to the small dock below the villa. The water was glass, reflecting stars so clearly it felt like the sky had fallen to the earth. Elena carried a small wooden box in her hands. "What's that?" Lorenzo asked. She smiled faintly. "Something I kept from the old house." She opened it. Inside lay a folded photograph, yellowed with time, and a music sheet. He took the photo gently. It was the one they'd found months ago in the burned remains. Her, the child, and the shadow of a man who was barely him. Lorenzo exhaled slowly. "I used to hate this picture," he said. "It reminded me of everything I destroyed. And now," he traced the edge of it with his thumb. "Now it reminds me of everything I rebuilt." Elena placed the music sheet beside it. The melody he'd finished. "A home by the sea. I thought we could bury them here," she said softly. "Let them rest where the waves can carry them away." He nodded. Together, they knelt by the shore. The sea whispered against the sand as they placed the photograph and sheet into the box. Closing the lid gently, Lorenzo dug into the sand with his hands, his movements steady, reverent. When they covered it, Elena laid a single white shell on top, small, unbroken, perfect. "Goodbye," she whispered. But Lorenzo shook his head. "Not goodbye," he said quietly. "Just thank you." When they walked back up the hill, the villa glowed in warm light, windows open, curtains dancing with the wind. Matteo was asleep again, curled with his toy boat in his arms. Inside, the air smelled of jasmine and sea salt. Elena went to close the windows, but Lorenzo stopped her gently. "Leave them open," he said. "Let the sea in." She smiled and turned toward him. "You've changed, Lorenzo Romano." He laughed softly. "You made sure of that." She stepped closer. "No, you chose it." He brushed a strand of hair from her face. "Then I chose you too." Their lips met, slow, steady, unhurried, not the desperate kind of love that came from pain or fear, but the quiet kind that was built from healing. The kind that didn't demand, only stayed. When they parted, she whispered, "What happens now?" Lorenzo looked out toward the horizon, the moon painting silver over the waves. "Now," he said softly, "now we live." A weeks passed. Seasons shifted. The house became alive with laughter, dinners shared with friends, evenings of music and wine, mornings of sunlight and salt air. Sometimes, Lorenzo would still wake before dawn and stand at the balcony, staring at the horizon. The ghosts no longer spoke to him, but the past still hummed quietly, a melody that never fully left, and yet, it didn't hurt anymore. Alina would find him there, always, and without words she would slide her hand into his, grounding him back to the present. Back to her. He once believed love was something fragile. Something to be feared, or worse, to be controlled. But now he understood the truth: love wasn't fragile at all. It was the only thing strong enough to survive them both. On the first anniversary of the fire, the night their old life ended, they held a small gathering at the villa. No speeches. No toasts. Just music. Lorenzo sat at the piano once more, Elena beside him, Matteo playing nearby. The melody filled the room, weaving through the soft glow of candles. It wasn't sad, it was full, luminous, alive. Halfway through, Matteo climbed into his father's lap, pressing tiny hands on the keys, giggling at the sound. Lorenzo smiled. Truly smiled. And let him play. Elena watched them, tears catching the light in her eyes. For the first time, she wasn't afraid of losing anything, because she finally understood, what they had wasn't born from survival. It was born from choice. And choice, freely given, fiercely kept, was the purest form of love. Later that night, when the guests had gone and the candles burned low, Elena and Lorenzo walked outside once more. The sea shimmered beneath the moon, calm and infinite. He stood behind her, arms around her waist, resting his chin on her shoulder. "Do you remember what you said once?" she murmured. "That love was just another weapon." He smiled faintly against her hair. "Then I was a fool. And now," he turned her gently to face him. "Now I know love isn't a weapon," he said softly. "It's the only thing that heals the wounds no one can see." She smiled through quiet tears. Then were both finally free. The wind carried their laughter out toward the sea, where it dissolved into the rhythm of the waves. Endless, eternal, reborn.